Alright, so today's video is about what I'm going to be referring to as the Cornerstone. So we have this article. I always want to say 2019 because I think that's probably when I first saw it. But it was from spring of 2018 in the Journal of Economic Perspectives. So we have Space, the Final Economic Frontier. So this article is by Matt Weinzierl. So he's over at HBS, Harvard Business School. And this channel would not exist if this article was not written, so a hat tip to Matt for that. And so what we're going to do today is just get a little overview of what this article is about. The general framework eventually expanded into a book form, so we'll cover that in a separate video. This PDF is freely available. If you go into Google Scholar, you can find it right here. So you have a link from the American Economic Association, so you can get your own copy. You'll notice this is coming up at the top, even though it's not the most cited of his works. Optimal Taxation, which is less interesting to me, but that one has more sites so far. And this one's starting to climb up the ladder. So anyway, if you click this, you can get your own PDF of that. So here it is, and let's get into the gist of what it's about. It's about I think I don't know, 20ish or so. Let's see, yeah, 19 pages. So not too bad as far as journal articles go. So for most of its history, space was the domain of governments. So geopolitical competition is what drove it, national pride. Those are what the space programs were largely fueled by. And so what Matt points out here is that is changing fast. And even this, so the year of this video is 2025, so this is 7 years old at this point, but still pretty fresh in terms of the economic literature. And the reason I call it the cornerstone is because this is the first small piece, but you can't build the rest of your structure without the cornerstone. You have the cornerstone, then the foundation, which is what I'm going to call the book that he co-wrote, and that came out earlier this year. I think it was in February of 25. And in my opinion, that is the foundation of what one of the goals of this channel is to help establish that space economics is worthy of being its own sort of subfield of study within the broader umbrella of the economic discipline. And everything else can sort of scaffold itself upon this cornerstone and then the foundation that is the book version. So anyways, used to be mostly government driven. That's changing fast. A lot of the things it points out is the shift that we've been able to witness in real time for everyone that is older than 7 years old. Going from this public sector model to a more decentralized commercial sort of free-for-all that is sometimes referred to as quote-unquote new space. So a lot of insights from this, and we'll use his framework to understand how this new space economy is being built, the market failures that it needs to overcome, as well as some sort of big ethical questions that we need to answer before it's too late. So let's get into it. To understand where we're going, we need to know where we've been. And so after the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, that was back in 1957, I myself was born in the 1900s, but not quite that long ago. So that was before my time, but still well within lifetimes of many people that are still roaming around. But that's when the U.S. government created NASA, and they poured massive funding into the Apollo program. And at its peak in the mid-1960s, NASA's budget was 0.7% of the entire U.S. GDP. So this created a model, and that model was centralized and public sector. So NASA would determine what the strategy is going to be. NASA would coordinate the market, and they were the primary customer for the major aerospace firms. So the goals were public goods, things like national security, scientific discovery, national pride we mentioned. So this sort of command and control structure worked because it put a man on the moon. But after Apollo is when NASA started to struggle. So its budget began a long and persistent decline from that 0.7% down to 0.1% of GDP today. So programs like the space shuttle had successes, like building the International Space Station, but they were super expensive, and ultimately it handicapped the growth of the commercial sector. We had the tragic loss of the Challenger and Columbia shuttles, so that further eroded the momentum that this centralized approach had previously had. So the entire model suffered from classic economic problems. There's weak incentives for efficiency. There's poor use of information and a resistance to innovation. So the end of the shuttle program in 2011 created a vacuum, and this vacuum allowed the private sector to rush in. So this is the era of quote-unquote new space. So we're talking about companies funded by entrepreneurs like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and they are pouring their private fortunes that they made from other ventures into space ventures, alongside billions in venture capital. So this isn't just a handful of companies either anymore. We're seeing a diverse ecosystem starting to emerge. You have firms specializing in everything from launch services and remote sensing to building commercial space stations and even planning for asteroid mining. And it's a big business already. The space sector at the time of this writing was $300 billion in annual revenue. If you've seen any of the news roundups of the space industry videos that I've been posting, we know it's higher than that today, 7 years later. Though most of that is still from the well-established satellite industry, which was true when Matt wrote this as well as today. The main difference, though, is the approach to risk. Under the old model, contractors worked on cost plus contract. So this insulated them from risk, but also the potential rewards of a commercial market. So in new space, private firms share in both the large risks that are involved and in the potentially large returns. So how do you transition from a government monopoly to a thriving market? Well, this is where Matt's article points to a key innovation, the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services Program, which is often referred to by the acronym COTS, or COTS. So instead of telling companies how to build a rocket, NASA essentially said, hey, we need a taxi service to the International Space Station. We'll be a customer, not your supervisor. That's a quote from the... So NASA switched from complex cost-plus contracts to a fixed price payments for services. Now, this was a game changer because it shifted the risk to the private firms, and it gave them an incentive to be innovative and for them to control costs, because then they could profit more. So companies like SpaceX and Orbital Sciences were now responsible for designing their own systems. And they even got to keep their own IP, their intellectual property, And that was a huge deal because of all the value in that. So the results of this, basically NASA got its cargo delivery services for a fraction of the cost. Delivering a kilogram of cargo via SpaceX at this time cost about 1/3 of what it would have been with the space shuttle. And so this freed up NASA's budget to focus on its core missions, deep space exploration and basic science. And we know since this publication, the costs have gone down even further. Just last month proved that out. We talked about some of the math behind that in another news roundup the other day. So the public-private partnership model proved so successful that it spurred massive innovation, most notably the drive towards reusable rockets, which could slash the cost of accessing space by a factor of 100. The transition has been so profound that the U.S. government is now looking to cede the direction of most activities in low Earth orbit to the private sector. But just, letting the market work is not enough. The space economy faces classic market failures that could stop it before it even gets started. And Matt highlights two of the big ones. I keep referring to him as Matt, as if we're buds. I don't know him personally, but I've seen him in other venues refer to himself as Matt, so I will do so as well. So the first two market failures that could be problematic are pointed out here. First, the complementarities and coordination. So if we think about this, cheap rocket launches aren't very useful if there's nowhere to go and nothing to do out in space, which is behind me here. Space habitats are useless if you can't get to them. Asteroid mining makes no sense without in-space manufacturing to use the materials, and all these technologies are interdependent. Individually, their payoff is somewhat limited, but together they could create a self-sustaining system with an enormous profit potential. He points out that the risk is a classic stag hunt scenario. So if firms are not sure that others will build those other pieces that complement their part, then nobody moves forward, and the market gets stuck in this equilibrium position that's fairly low value. And this is where a public body like NASA can play a crucial role in terms of coordination. They could be funding multiple competitors in key areas like commercial crew and space habitats to ensure the whole ecosystem develops together. The second major market failure is a classic tragedy of the commons. So this is a well-studied area of economics, and in this case it applies. And this is part of my argument that space economics is due to become its own subfield, because the tragedy of the commons applies in a different way. It's the same concept, but in this different environment, literally, it takes on a different facet. So the main example we get here is in terms of space debris. So there are already an estimated 23,000 objects larger than a softball going around Earth, not to mention millions of smaller pieces. So even a cherry-sized piece of debris has the explosive power of a grenade when you're traveling at speeds in orbit. He knows that this problem's getting worse, especially after a few major events like a 2009 satellite collision and a 2007 Chinese anti-satellite missile test created a bunch of debris clouds that otherwise wouldn't be there. So this is what we call in economics a negative externality. So every new satellite launched adds to the congestion that's up there because it's another item floating around. And if there's another item floating around, the risk of collision is going to go up every time, just because of probabilities. But there's no single operator that has an incentive to clean any of it up, and incentives matter. So standard economic solutions are hard to apply here. You can't easily implement a Pigovian tax because there's no global space taxing authority. And you can't assign property rights to orbital slots to let companies negotiate, because space is governed by mostly international treaties that prevent any of those sort of claims to even be made. So without a solution, we risk what's pointed out as the Kessler syndrome, and that's a runaway chain reaction of collisions that could render orbit unusable for generations because of all the junk that would be floating around after. So, even if we build an efficient market, we have to ask who benefits, who makes the rules, and this brings us to the final part of the framework presented in this article, which is tempering the market for social objectives. So we can consider asteroid mining. The 1967 Outer Space Treaty is ambiguous. So it says that celestial bodies cannot be nationally appropriated, but encouraging the responsible use of space resources. So this legal gray area was effectively a huge risk for private investors. And then in 2015, the U.S. passed the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act. And so that was 10 years ago now. And it basically said that while a company can't own an asteroid, it can own the resources that it extracts from that asteroid. So a finder's keepers type of rule. Now this was a bold move to create property rights, in a sense, and incentivized private investment. And the justification is rooted in the Lockean proviso that it's okay to appropriate a resource as long as it leaves enough for others and that nobody else is worse off. Now this has created a regulatory race. Luxembourg saw an opportunity. They passed similar laws to attract asteroid mining companies, effectively positioning itself as the Delaware of space. And while this may spur development, it does raise some questions about equity. And how will the value that's created from these common resources be shared among all the people and countries on Earth, both near term and long term into the future? So, what this article also establishes is the fact that economic development of space is really no longer science fiction. So we're at a critical juncture here, transitioning from this government-led endeavor to a new economic frontier that's driven by private ambitions. And so as the analysis from this article shows, this transition requires a sophisticated approach. So it's more than just about technology, and it's about designing markets, correcting their failures, and then dealing with the ethical questions about property, equity, and the collective future of everybody on Earth. So the decisions that are made today will shape whether space becomes a source of prosperity for all of us humans hanging out on Earth, or just a playground for the ultra-rich. But, as their title says here, it truly is the final economic frontier. So, you made it this far. Thanks for watching. And check out the other video about the book version that effectively was built on this article and what I'm going to be calling the foundation. So thanks for learning about the Cornerstone. And Matt.